Welcome to an all-new On the Mark TV and radio from Westfield Community Programming, 89.5 FM WSKB, and our media partners at Agawam Media and Southwick Community Television. I'm your host, Mark Auerbach, in an alternate studio today, and my first guest is journalist Dusty Christensen. He teaches journalism at UMass, but he's known as being an investigative reporter and working for a variety of organizations. You probably read his stuff in the Daily Hampshire Gazette or heard his stories on New England Public Media and other things. And Dusty is one of those investigative reporters who really digs up and explores a lot of fascinating stories that happen not only here in Western Massachusetts, but around the globe. I'm also fascinated with the idea that that Uber and Lyft drivers could unionize because their working conditions are pretty awful.
They receive low pay, long hours, and at the moment, they're considered independent contractors here in our state, which is something that a lot of companies attempt to do in order to get around having to allow their workers to join a union. I myself was somebody who helped unionize the Daily Hampshire Gazette back in 2018. I'm now a part of the Massachusetts Teachers Association as a faculty member at UMass. Our union, the MTA, is fully backing that MCAS ballot question. And obviously, a lot of folks in organized labor are going to be paying attention to this one with the Uber, Lyft, and other rideshare drivers as well.
I mean, I'm a real fan of unions because I covered the arts, and Actors Equity has provided so much protection for the theater community, particularly during COVID and during the AIDS crisis. People that got access to a lot of medical care by being members of the union. And sure, they had to pay dues, and the union typified or defined who was a professional actor and who wasn't. If you were in the union, you were considered a pro. Otherwise, you were considered an amateur. And as a result of that, I've become a fan of unions and what they can do for their employees. Even though, as a business person, I would not want the people working for me to necessarily want to form a union.
It allows for greater democracy in the workplace. It allows workers to have a voice over the place where, let's be honest, we spend a huge chunk of our lives. I mean, we spend a full third of our days, 5 days a week, if we have a 40-hour job at the workplace. And yet it's one of the places for the vast majority of US workers where you have no say over your working conditions. Most workers here in the United States and in Massachusetts too are considered at-will employees, which means that their bosses can fire them for anything without providing any sort of just cause for it. Never mind that they have no control over their wages, their vacation time, their paid time off. So unions really are a driving force for democracy in this country.
Where can people find out more about the ballot questions, the pros and cons of each one before they go to the polls?
That's a great question. I know that every year we have ballot questions on the ballot. There is a pamphlet put out by the Secretary of the Commonwealth's office. They allow the pro and anti sides of any particular ballot question to put their case out to the world, and so that people can be informed. I'm sure you could also find that pamphlet on the Secretary of the Commonwealth's office. There's also some really great news coverage going on about those ballot questions. I'm sure we will have some at the Shoestring, where I'm an editor, a local news outlet. There's also New England Public Media. The local newspapers are doing great jobs covering the respective sides of this campaign. I know that my colleagues at NEPM are focusing on all five, and are going to have articles and radio pieces up, sort of delving into the respective sides of each ballot question. So folks should definitely be paying attention as November approaches here.
And I would say to people, pay attention more to what New England Public Media or the Shoestring or the Republican or the Westfield News is saying, rather than watching a Facebook feed or a Twitter feed, because there is so much incredible misinformation on social media.
There sure is. And what separates us news reporters from social media posters or bloggers is that we are committed to getting to the truth, hearing all sides of a story. And let's face it, and the chances that we get it wrong, sometimes, like all humans, we get it wrong. We're committed to correcting our mistakes. And I think that separates us from all that misinformation online.
It certainly does, but we as media people have come under attack over the last 6 to 8 years, since the beginning of the first Trump administration, as being fake, telling lies, and everything else. And I think the public gets confused now about what's real news and what's fake news.
It's very true. The Committee to Protect Journalists, which is a wonderful nonprofit organization that's been around, I think, for decades now. I believe Walter Cronkite was maybe the first member of their board, if I'm getting those details right. They just put out a report in recent weeks detailing the alarm among journalists about the climate surrounding journalism after President Trump's first campaign and now candidate Trump's second campaign. We really are seeing a rise in attacks on journalists. Thankfully, we live in a country that at the moment, where at the moment journalists aren't facing significant threat of violence, but that is something that happens globally, and it is something that happens in a lot of the countries where Donald Trump has expressed open admiration of their leaders. I'm thinking places like Russia or maybe Hungary, and so. It's definitely something that we're paying attention to as journalists. I see increasing vitriol directed towards us investigative journalists in particular. And we're going to continue doing our jobs no matter what the circumstances. But obviously, we prefer to have a world where not just journalists, but whistleblowers and those seeking transparency are protected as well. I don't want to let the Democrats off the hook either. They have prosecuted whistleblowers in the past as well. We're continuing to see the deaths of dozens upon dozens of journalists in Gaza right now. It's definitely a concerning trend worldwide, and it's what we have to live with as journalists.
You're teaching young journalists to learn their craft, learn their art of being a journalist and going out there in the world and functioning. The young students that you have, are they aware of the world in which you and I work every day?
I try to make them aware. We talk in the very last class of every semester about why we unionized at the Daily Hampshire Gazette, the poor working conditions that we faced, the as well as the attacks on the Fourth Estate, both from corporate consolidation, companies like Gatehouse or hedge funds like Alden Global Capital, gobbling up newspapers and stripping them for parts. But we also talk about the positives. I never want to leave people in a place of darkness without any sort of solution. And, we were talking about unions earlier. Workers can take matters into their own hands and fight to protect the things that they know are important and love. And obviously, for us journalists, that is the Fourth Estate. That is our industry seeking truth. And so I think it's incumbent on us as journalists to really come together and to fight for better transparency in our state and across the country and better protections for ourselves and for a healthier news ecosystem. I think given that this stuff is in the news a lot of my students are aware that it's a challenging time for journalism, but it's also a really exciting time for journalism. There is sort of a resurgence in interest in investigative journalism, probably within the last decade or so, maybe after the Edward Snowden story and the publication of that in places like The Guardian, the New York Times. There really has been a surge in interest in journalism. Students are hungry to dig after the truth, and a lot of my students seem undeterred by the challenges that are in front of them.
A lot of my students, and I do a lot of work with students at various high schools and colleges in terms of radio broadcasting and all of that. They're entranced with the glamour of it all. We are producing here. We're going to live broadcast the Berkshire Theater Critics Association Awards, or the Berkeys, and I'm going to do a pre-show on the red carpet kind of thing. And this is their dream job, interviewing celebrities. And I have to remind them that It's a part of the job, but we have a bigger responsibility as journalists, and it's not all glamour and tuxedos and celebrity. I'm sure some of your students come in and think, well, I'm going to be an award-winning television anchor, and I'm going to get to go to all these places. I'm going to be the next David Muir and have somebody style my hair. But there's so much more to it.
Absolutely. And I'm always trying to remind them that so many of those people you see on TV, not all of them, but many of them who are in those spots where they're able to have those glamorous assignments now, they got there by being in the trenches, by covering the arts beat, for example, at a local newspaper where, obviously there are shows where you get to go to a gala or a showing and it's a really fun job to do. But inevitably, there's also those stories that come up on the arts beat or the education beat, whatever beat that you're on, that are more hard hitting or that are, more challenging stories as well. And so, it really takes a generalist to be, on any particular beat. And I think students, I'm sure yours do as well. They really understand that, and I think that there is a lot of criticism of this generation for being on social media. But I have to say that oftentimes I think what that means for my students is they also are doing a lot of reading online, maybe more than we as the older generations give them credit for, and really understand these things pretty well.
And they also, and people don't remember this, they also have to learn punctuation, grammar, or if they're working in a world of like mine in radio and television, what words to pronounce. And in some cases, like with me, there's certain words I can't do. So you have to work around them. And you have to remember, as a radio person or TV, sound and visual are as important as the word. You're teaching them all of that. And, oftentimes we forget that foundation that we all learn can help us in a variety of ways.
It sure can. And I can't say that my students are thrilled when they learn that it's the day where we're going to be spending 30 minutes on the passive voice, or, we're going to be spending a significant amount of time wondering why a comma goes here but not there, or talking about appositives or the present perfect tense, or, all these wonky things. But, obviously our job as journalists, no matter what our medium, is to be communicating, to be understood by the entire audience. And grammar, pronunciation, diction, all of that is a part of the job.
And you can't learn that in a textbook. I've learned that now from personal experience. Any journalism textbook cannot teach you the nuances that we have to do to do our work.
I totally agree with that. I think that because journalism nowadays has become more of a thing that people go to school for and then they get master's degrees for, which the reason for that is there's less news jobs out there. That is the way to sort of break into the industry. But I think people forget that what we do really is a trade at the core of it. It really is something that you learn by doing. You learn as a hands-on profession, doing it on the job. I myself did not study journalism as an undergrad, but I got a master's degree in journalism, and I was astounded by what I didn't know when I showed up to that first newsroom job at a radio station in New York City. I learned so much by just listening to other reporters, veteran reporters, talking on the phone, how they left voicemails, how they talked to a source who was being combative or comforted a source who was sharing their darkest, most vulnerable moment. It really is something that you just got to learn by doing. And I think sometimes my students get intimidated by that, but I think the flip side of that is it means you get to start doing it right away. You don't have to have some theoretical background, 6 years in school to do it. Pick up a pad and paper and get out there. You might make some mistakes, but you're going to learn doing it.
And a lot of people think that to get a career in journalism, you have to start at the Republican or the New York Times or the Globe. But there are a lot of weekly and local newspapers where you can get a start and actually get your foot in the door, or in community access journalism that went from New England Public Media to here. Westfield Community Programming and its network of other community programming offers a variety of journalistic opportunities. And you are not necessarily confined to, you can only do a 20-minute thing or a 30-minute thing, but you could do an hour program and you can pick your topics to some degree. So it's a great way to get your feet wet in the industry. And there are so many options out there, blogging and stuff like that. So don't necessarily think that your first step into journalism is the employment office at the Times.
I think that's so true. And you know me, I'm a local journalist through and through. I have written for national outlets, but a lot of my focus is on the local level. And I think some people look at that and they say, oh, local news. Yeah, the cat stuck in the tree, right? The firefighters going to get the cat up in the tree, like stories like that. There's a wonderful comedy show, on, I believe it's called Mr. Show, on years ago, where they had a great bit where they did international local stories on the international level. And, it would be things like today in Gaza, a cat was saved from a tree,
Yeah.
but in reality, so many of the biggest stories emerge from local journalism. Places like the New York Times and the Boston Globe, let's face it, they read local papers to get a lot of their stories that are based in places where they are not located. Oftentimes they steal those stories from us local journalists. There's a tendency to maybe think that local journalism isn't as sexy as being Woodward and Bernstein at the Washington Post, but I'm here to tell you that it is, as you know very well, it is where all of it is at. All politics is local. So much of everything is local, and it really begins on that local level. So get out there and be a part of that community newspaper that just covers your little village and wherever you live, or that regional newspaper. I can tell you that I got a better experience in journalism at the Daily Hampshire Gazette than I probably would have ever gotten at some bigger newspaper, because you're really forced to get out there and be a part of the community.
And it's important to be a part of the community and to know people when you walk down the street. And there are oftentimes great news sources for me, when I go to a performance at a theater, people will come up to me and tell me something that's going on in another theater. And it opens up a door of opportunities for things I can cover. We only got a couple of minutes left, but I've been a part of this news thing, the shoestring. Tell
That's
me
right.
about it and I'm fascinated by it and I do read your stuff. Tell people what it is and how they can find it.
Absolutely. We're at the shoestring.org. We are a local news magazine, alternative news source, independent. We're almost entirely funded by our readers. You can find us at the shoestring.org. If you love what you see there, consider becoming a subscriber and donating. There is no paywall. All the content is free. So we really rely on our readers. And I think what separates us is that we focus largely on deep dive stories. That means investigative reporting. That means expansive profiles. We, for example, spent a number of days up in one of the smallest towns in Massachusetts, Leiden, up in Franklin County, hanging out with local activists there who were trying to institute a good government movement amid a police corruption scandal there. We're following the money, whether that's in local politics or business or where have you. We really try to separate ourselves by breaking big, important stories that other outlets aren't doing. And we're really committed to digging for the truth, not, as the sort of journalism cliche goes, comforting the afflicted and afflicting the comfortable. We're out there trying to do our best to dig for uncomfortable truths here in Western Mass. And I hope people enjoy it. We're a very small outlet at the moment, run by just a few people and a dedicated group of freelancers. If you're a writer looking to write, get in touch with us. We pay well for freelancers in the region. Or if you're a reader, sign up for our newsletter and consider donating. We could use your support.
I find it refreshing. I love some of the stories that you do, and there's stories that you're not going to see anywhere else.
That's right. I think we are not set up to be the daily news organization that the Republic and the Daily Hampshire Gazette are, even the NEPMs. Those outlets are really great at what they do, and they've got some great journalists working there. Where we separate ourselves is that when you click on the shoestring, you're going to come across articles that you didn't see anywhere else and that you wouldn't have seen anywhere else.
That's true. One last question that somebody asked me to ask you. They hear
Sure.
you on radio, they read you. Do you prefer to do print or radio or television?
It's such a good question. I'm still getting used to television. You're gonna have to teach me the tips and tricks of the industry here. I am a writer at heart, I have to say, and so I really enjoy the printed word. I love getting to analyze every sentence, tweak a story 10, 15 times before publication, and then when it comes out, knowing that I really spent a lot of time crafting each sentence with love. I wanted to initially be a fiction writer when I was a kid. I wrote tiny short stories in a little binder of mine when I was just in elementary school. So I think I do prefer print, but radio is amazing. It's great to be in conversation. It feels more human. It feels like we're really connecting with our audience in radio. So those are definitely my two favorite mediums for sure.
Well, I hope that all of our listeners and viewers today get a chance to read Dusty Christensen's work in the shoestring or hear him on New England Public Media. Dusty, it's always a pleasure to chat with you. You have to come back again soon.
As soon as you want to have me, I'm here. Thanks for having me on today.
That sounds great. Thanks to Dusty Christensen. We're going to take a brief break to acknowledge the underwriters that make programming here on Westfield Community Programming 89.5 FM and our media partners at Agawa Media and Southwick Community Television possible. Peter Coles has been our chief engineer today. I'm Mark Auerbach. Don't go away because we'll be right back.